right, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. The cycle of deter, detect, and mitigate are critical components of any successful insider risk program. In this webinar, the final of a three-part series focused on each of the components, we would dive deeper into proactive risk mitigation. My name is Jameson Mitchell, and I'm a part of the Counterintelligence and Counter-Cyber Threat team at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. I will serve as the moderator for today's event. I am fortunate to be joined by a special guest who will serve as our spotlight panelist for this discussion. Before I introduce our spotlight panelists, a couple housekeeping items. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent. If we are unable to answer attendees' questions during the webinar, we'll do our best to follow up with answers after the webinar. I'd like now to introduce our spotlight panelists, Dr. Liza Briggs, social scientist, cultural anthropologist, United States Marine Corps. Dr. Briggs, welcome, and thank you for participating in today's discussion.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for inviting me here this afternoon. So I have to make the note that the pronunciation is always tricky. It's spelled away. It's pronounced Lisa.
Lisa, my apologies.
It's okay. It's a 50-50 chance that it'll get mispronounced. So I find it amusing at the same time. So.
All right. Thank you again for joining us. A little blurb here from our abstract. As we explore the 2024 National Insider Threat Awareness Month, NITAM, Detect, Deter, Mitigate, we will face the toughest element of the theme. After detecting an insider risk or deterring one, how do we mitigate the threat to the agency? I'd like to give our panelists the opportunity to respond to our questions. So first, the critical pathway that everyone's familiar with from Dr. Shaw is accepted by almost all insider threat practitioners to understand how a good person, perhaps someone who's passed a favorable background investigation or is currently enrolled in continuous evaluation, ends up introducing a risk or threat into an organization. How can mitigation best support the idea of early detection?
From my perspective, and I have to back up a bit because, I come at the problem sets in the insider threat community as an applied cultural anthropologist. And so most of the time, for all of us who are in the insider threat space, you're hearing social scientists who are clinical psychologists or somehow involved in psychology. And so that differentiation between types of disciplines matters. And the way it matters for me and how it affects the answer to the question is that I look at problem sets from the larger lens of organizations and culture, which is very amorphous and difficult. So when I look at the question of mitigation, it's not a response, it's not a step. It's something that's applicable the entire time that you have a person in a workplace, right? So for me, it can best support early detection when it's applied and recognized, because that's the other part, as something that's not on a continuum in a linear kind of way that is done in response to something that went wrong necessarily, but rather as something that's done in the advertisement for the job. And when you're onboarding, you're always mitigating, because mitigation is something that's continuous. So I'll start with that and let's see if we go any deeper, and I can talk more about that if you like.
Okay. So when we think of mitigation from the milestone, professional and personal stressors, employee assistance programs can be a double-edged sword for our contractors who are supporting government agencies. What are your feelings or thoughts on that?
Let's say it again. It's
a double-edged sword for our contractors who support government contracts.
How so?
So when you're going to the employee assistance program, that may raise some concerns for the contract company, and sometimes their mitigation is to separate the employee, I guess, to prevent losing the contract. So that double-edged sword does exist. And what are your thoughts or opinions on how EAP can be used by contract agencies as a mitigation effort?
I think EAP, like everybody else, and I understand that contractors have different terms that they work through and work around, but from my perspective, it's the same. Don't wait till something happens to start talking mitigation. Look beyond. And I'm really asking for a paradigm shift in how we currently look at things, because I think once we frame it with the critical pathway, we're talking about individuals and stressors. And I'm talking about the organization, the environment, the people around the individual and what they do. So it doesn't matter if it's an EAP program or if it's contractors or the private sector. If you're looking at mitigation, if you're trying to deal with mitigation problems, you have to step back from individuals and engaging individually and really look at what you're doing around the individual or the groups of individuals and start thinking about how to handle it there. Any program or component of a program, or even a response like an EAP, which is kind of a thing that people do primarily when something goes wrong, has to kind of move outside of that and be very proactive. And many have. I've received lots of material from my EAP because I'm a part of that program as a government employee that talk to me about or address wellness and offer opportunities for me to kind of go out and get assistance. Insider Threat can kind of elevate that by also strategically communicating about these and really tying them into the notion of getting ahead of things. All of our messaging mantras, getting ahead of problems, let's not get to loss. Let's take things before they become a problem, and really working through the channels that our EAP exists through things like our working group, which EAP, HR, that just a natural kind of connection there, and really pushing that. We don't always have to, lots of times when I talk about this thing, I think people in the insider threat community in particular say, oh, these are great, Dr. Briggs, but we can't do everything, and we shouldn't. We're not really there to do everything. But if we're working well in the frameworks that have been given to us, which involve different disciplines coming together, we can use the things that are already being done and dovetail. And in a way, we're showing not only our employees that we're engaging outside of detection and that gotcha mode or enforcement or something like that, and we really are showing the human element and that we care and recognize all of those phases. And that could be an easy collaboration and connection with HR and EAP specifically, or even bringing EAP to the table to talk to them about how we do our business. I think those are all great ideas that are doable and not expensive. I'm always talking about how to do it cheaply as a government person. And without too much of a lift for folks who are trying to make this stuff happen without funding.
Yeah, I know it just brings up one of those great points. Some of the themes I've seen over the past year are how, insider risk programs refer to it as supporting through reporting. So not necessarily the gotcha moment as you speak of, but lending that support early on so that we can put our arms around an employee. So that brings me to the next question. Insider threat risk tends to be seen as a security function. I know you kind of alluded to that in your previous response. How can mitigation help organizations think about other stakeholders like legal, HR, compliance, EAP? What are your thoughts there?
Well, first thing, I do recognize that no one size shoe fits all. But insider threat, if we go back historically to the original policies, it was never really designed to be a security function. It
Right.
may look like that. It was always designed to be disciplinarily agnostic in best practice, attached to the program to like a chief of staff or someone very senior who can get the message and help you take it across the organization, to not silo it into one type of discipline or not. That's all great, but culture is what it is, and how programs have come together vary. And a lot of our programs, including the one that I primarily support, are under a security fabric. And it's an issue because it gives it a flavor, right? And a focus. And again, sometimes it's necessary because of the program's goals. I work in an intelligence organization. We care about intel. Security is not intel. That means we often have some issues of understanding where you end and where we begin. You can't go to all the meetings because you're not intel. You don't have the clearance. You can't talk about that because that's classified. So there are those inherent things that happen as a result of that. The mitigation thing, I think, is to also go back to the original doctrine. Insider threat programs were meant to be not a thing, but like a collaborating tool that brought together different working group assets and worked within their own, they all have things that they're able to do. CI has certain, statutes and things that they follow, and they have things they can do. HR does as well. So does legal. There's no need for an insider threat program, and this is, in my opinion, to recreate any of that within. but rather to use those. And that's how you scale a program. When you get buy-in by all of the different stakeholders that are a part of it, ethics, you bring them to the table, maybe even EAP at some point. Bring in whatever unit that already exists that deals with behavioral issues in a unit. And I'm thinking in a military community, there are clinical psychologists on the ground in units all over the globe. For Army, Navy, all of them. They should be in. If we're concerned about mental health, we should be partnering with those folks and using them to make sense of things, because they know more than we do. We don't have to try to rehire the whole thing within our own program. It was part of the original structure, and I think that that's a good way to go in terms of making links that can help us do mitigation better. We don't have the authorities to do a lot of things, right? So get the people at the table who do. Provide them with decision advantage using the tools that we have and the new knowledge that we have. Because again, when Insider Threat was developed, it was meant to do things that weren't already being done all over in terms of information, especially through tools like UAM. So we have something special. Let's figure out how we can let others know across our organizations what's in it for them to use the tools and the information that we have, and develop partnerships so that mitigation isn't just insider threat thing, it's an organizational thing.
Now, that's a very key point, and breaking down those silos of excellence to incorporate everyone's background and expertise. I mean, obviously, you can't do a lot of things without your HR. You should not do anything without your general counsel. Having compliance and ethics are also key stakeholders. So very well received on that point. So I want to kind of shift and talk about this year's theme, deter, detect, mitigate. Is mitigation the end of the process for you? If not, how do you think we can go about linking mitigation to the first two, detect and deter?
So I think I said it when in the beginning, when I talked about it not being a step, but rather a process. I see mitigation at, like I said, at the point where you create a position description. Let's just say USA Jobs posting, let's talk government. Mitigation has to do with setting the tone for who you are and what's allowed, and being consistent, letting people know what they can do so that they're not going down the pathway because of things that are left undone or untouched throughout the process. And so, for example, mitigation can come in policies and plans and directives by the way you word those. It comes through things like messages from seniors and consistency between that message and the messages you're hearing in your day-to-day, meaning your line managers. When those things align and you've created an organization where people feel they can talk about things, where they know how to access, if that's what's available to them, their EAP or EAP-like resources, when they're encouraged to do it. And I go beyond that, because there's what's there in the formal things, and we all know that. We all have good things that tell us what to do. But what we have to also do from a cultural standpoint is make sure that the sort of secret things, that the way that people really do it, matches up in ways that are healthy and productive for individuals and also for the organization. That's culture in my mind. It's aligning all of those things so that you have unity in message, you're saying the right things. And when you don't, you fix it and tweak it. And you're kind of transparent and connected with the people in your organization. Because after all, and everyone says this, but I say it, it's not just about behaviors. It's about behaviors in the appropriate context. So you can't, if we're only looking, and I have to say, because I don't want it to seem that, oh, Dr. Briggs got on this thing and then poo-pooed on the critical pathway. I am not. The critical pathway has been really important to the work of social science in helping establish the notion that it's not just about gotcha. It's not just about catching and criminalizing people. It's about treating them like humans. And the critical pathway has given us a way of seeing this trajectory and to intervening. And it's used, and I love that, but we have to move forward and do more. What I would say then, because of the lens that I bring, is that we have to start coloring in the blocks and getting beyond just individuals. Because as I've said before, when you only focus on individuals in your organization, that's like that 1975 arcade game made in Japan, whack-a-mole.
Yep.
You're just hitting at the problems, but you're really not getting at what's going on. And I know we all notice that as professionals, but we haven't pushed to figure out how to bring those other aspects in to our conversations about it. But guess who gets it? The media, the Washington Post. I can tell you nearly every case that we hear about, they do the little thing on the side where they say, well, it's apparently at whatever organization it was, they had a culture of doing blah, blah, blah. That is not the critical pathway. That's culture. That's getting at organizationally what was going on. And then what we do is train you not to do unauthorized disclosure and remind you not to do that, or remind you that if you see something, you say something, but we're not dealing with the boogeyman, which is, or boogie person, I should say, right? Which is, what do you really have to do in the organization? How does that really work? What about the fact that people in your organization, as an example, don't believe that reporting works, or they think that snitches get stitches? All of those are, that's not critical pathway. That's the other part. And that's the part we have to push to now. We've done really well with understanding that individual unit. Let's scale it up, bump it over. Let's bring in other ways of thinking about humans besides as individuals, because we are well more than that. We have context to us. That's
Yeah,
what I
and
would say.
that fits right into the maladaptive organizational response is, one of those key factors on that critical pathway. Well, you brought up the media, so we talk about the news of insider threat cases and how some of them end in criminal prosecution. Can mitigation support other outcomes other than criminal prosecution in some of these cases?
Oh, yes, if you get in earlier. The thing that we do know is that, there are lots of people who are exhibiting behaviors who never do anything, right? That's that X factor. Like, what's the difference between those who do and those who don't? And so the thing is, we have to start tabbing metrics, I say, to what we do and see what changes matter in our organizations. That's a little complex, and it's not something you can do with a piece of paper and a survey and then get the answers and run and go. You have to do it over time, because our organizations are complex and they change. And I think we need to do that. Secondly, I think we should do that as a proof of what we do and of our value. We often talk in our world of trying to prove the negative, or how do you prove you're doing the work? You don't necessarily prove that you're making things stop. You show your work, and then the work shows in the outcome. And that's important. And no one asks us to show our work. They ask us, how many incidents did you have? How many people, how many policies do you have going? Do you have any that look at this and that? What they're not asking you is what kind of things you have in place so that none of those things pop. Talk about what we do through our working group and through our organization to not get to anything on the other side in terms of loss, attacks, or anything. And so I think that kind of twofold approach is a way to kind of work at that problem set.
It's perfect. Kind of talk us through, how do we understand behavior that people take action on based on a moral dilemma? When you bring up, those who do and those who don't, how can we better understand that from an insider threat practitioner standpoint?
Well, there's a whole presentation I do on bystander engagement that looks at why people choose to speak up. And what we know, and it's not my opinion, this is actually data and literature, is that people will make decisions that work in their lives, and we all do it, meaning all of us here today, using certain kind of moral cues and things that make us comfortable in the situation. And so there is research that shows there are like 18 different ones, and I've talked specifically about 3. And one of them is when people just have something else going on and they swap out what they're supposed to do with what they want to do, and they rationalize it based on their situation, and it may make sense. Here's one: I'm not going to report right now because I have pain in my stomach, and I need to go home, and maybe I'll deal with it later.
Right.
Nice explanation, but in the end, you knew you were supposed to do something. And this is very common. We do this in all walks of life about everything we do. Another one is where we kind of push responsibility to others. These are behavioral cognitive things that we do, but they don't just operate at the individual level. Offices of people do these same types of things. Where we see something, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go back to my desk right now because I do have an email. I have a call. I'm not going to respond to that comment. I'm behind on something. That's that same thing happening at an organizational level or in a meeting. Someone says something or does something, you're just like, yeah, I'm gonna go. Number one. Number two is when they defer responsibility. And that's kind of when people do things like, well, I know someone else saw that. That's a deferring the responsibility to someone else. So
Right.
I don't need to. He was staggering down the hallway. So I'm sure when he goes past the security office, they'll see him and someone will do something about it. Or you say something like, well, if there was better work-life balance here, we wouldn't have people all stressed out, throwing stuff and getting angry at people in the organization, which has nothing to do with the fact that you should be reporting if you see people doing that or take care of them. This is the how, this is why, this is what we understand about that. And the last one is you come in, HR gives you nice paper and tells you all these things, and then you take some tests, and then you go to a meeting and people say, yeah, that stuff you learned in the HR and when you were onboarding about X, Y, or Z, that's not really what we do.
Right. Yeah.
Or let's just go specifically. You're in a tech department. You're not supposed to share your access and your login information when you have privileged use on systems. But you all are really busy and there's been a lot of turnover. So around here, we just share our senior admin's privileges across. And that sets the tone. That helps create a culture. It's subtle. It happens constantly. You can get hits and ask people, why did you do that? And they're like, oh, because we're really busy. Well, our person left that's supposed to do it. We can't keep the lists updated to tell you who should have access and who doesn't. And so they don't. And that creates risk. It creates risk. So those are three type of mechanisms that actually work and function. And so the question is, so you asked me originally, so what do you do about it? Well, you create environments where people don't have to do that. Right? You make people feel comfortable. And that's soft stuff. I know someone said, oh, it's that kumbaya. We had someone go to a training and said it was really kumbaya. And I was
Right.
like, yeah, which is really strange for an organization that in the end is trying to prevent attacks and is built up with people who have enforcement backgrounds and histories, right? But we have to do all the parts. And again, we don't have to do it. Work through it. HR is that's I was like, HR likes the soft stuff. Get them to do that part. Yeah, you don't have to get the cops to make balloons and play nice with the employees. Get the people who already do at least some aspects of it. And we assist them with the knowledge set to do it. Like I said, it's cheap. It's already there. Build on what you already have. I don't really know many HRs that are kind of hostile to their employees, although I'm not saying it couldn't exist.
Right.
That's their role and function. And so showing them that as a part of it, again, two things for those specific examples. It sets the tone that insider threat and insider risk isn't just about slamming people and whacking them all. It's about humans in a broader context. And that's something that everybody around has some sort of, or should have some interest in or vested interest in. If nothing else, they have a mission that's focused on that. So you're already talking their language when you do those things.
Yeah. It's
Making
a
it
great
friendly,
point.
safe. I mean, all of those things, dealing with people. And again, the sad part, which is really sad, is the literature shows, because you'll hear people say this, is that you don't have to actually make the change. People just have to perceive that that's the way it is, which is sad. It also says that we're so thirsty in our work environments for validation and to be treated well, that if we think you are, then you are. And
Right.
we act accordingly. We act out less. We are willing to report less. Incidences of bullying happens less because you created the perception, the image that we care about that.
Yeah, one of our vice chairs, Mike Hudson, always says insider risk cannot be hammers looking for nails. We have to have other tools in our toolbox. I know that we're coming up on the last few minutes here, and I just want to kind of pivot and ask you for your best practices. As we have insider threat practitioners and multiple disciplines on the call today, what are some of the things that we can take away for this year's theme, detect, deter, and mitigate? From your background and your experience, what are those things that we can employ in our own programs to be better at the mitigation?
I think I said it before because I know you all, whenever I talk about this soft stuff, this stuff away from enforcement and this culture stuff, I've rarely had a room where people aren't nodding their heads. Intuitively, we get it, but we need to get specific about what that means and how to do it in our programs. And on that side, it's really not your fault. because you don't really have behavioral scientists apart from me, and I'm just one person pushing this one. We have clinical folks who are doing casework, wonderful casework, who are helping us look at problem sets and give information and make immediate um, uh, recommendations to deal with individual behaviors. That other stuff, we got to get there. There's training materials available. CDSC has some really nice materials. The Threat Lab, Perserac, which I think is sunsetting, and I'm not sure where they're going to archive that material. Great place for those types of things. More conversations like this. And what I do is often bring awareness. And then what I say to people, because I can't freight the whole industry, is let me know what you try. When you go talk about this with people, what did you guys come up with? Because to me, this type of talk generates things and actions, and then that generates best practice. As an example, I did a presentation on online gaming as a potential risk factor for NITAM. And I said, go out and talk about this with people and see what you get. One person came back to me at another event that happened the week and said they went and talked about it with their tech people and kind of just were, talking it up. And they said, what if I pulled and looked at something based on gaming habits, who's playing games a lot, and some other indicators? And she did it. And I was like, yeah, it didn't show anything, did it? She said, absolutely not. It showed a lot. It is a risk. It pulled up. So, and I looked at her and I was shocked and amazed. And so having her try that, that's the kind of thing that could be best practice. I said, you should present that. Tell the community what you did to see if other people can use it. It's organic. You don't need rocket scientists and behavioral scientists necessarily to tell you what to do, and it's not so expensive. She just had a talk, ran some stuff, and lo and behold, folks who were logging in and looking at gaming sites at work and also other factors showed some higher level of risks. And I was like, well, who knew? And that's data I can't get looking through journals. So I'll leave it there because it's almost time.
No, that's spot on. And I guess thinking outside of the box is something we always have to do as budget shrink and resources are scarce. Sometimes just those conversations and doing a little bit of detective work to find out what those potential indicators could be can save your program. So that's a very good antidote that we can take back and employ from our best practices. So I want to take a second again to thank you for coming on and presenting a wealth of knowledge. It's phenomenal to get a behavioral scientist or cultural anthropologist to give us that different side that we as the practitioners don't always have available as a resource, but also to see it from a different lens. It's always important as we move through mitigation that we understand how others perceive those same risk or issues. I know we have about 2 minutes left, but I want to check to see if there's any questions from the field and see if we have anything from our audience. And I do think really quick, building partnerships internally is a key point that you brought up. Any advice on how we can continue to build those internal partnerships?
One of the quickest things that I can say, I work in a program that's very mature, excellent, a whole case study on working groups and how they connect. One of the things that I've noticed that they do, and I know this sounds real basic, and that's what I'm trying to give you, things that you can literally try. There's always food, donuts. When we call together folks across, and I know that sounds really cheap, like, oh, really? Like, oh, so they're coming for the food. Well, they're setting the tone by showing that it's going to be relaxed. We're going to talk about things. We're going to eat. We're going to have coffee. That sets the stage. The second thing they always do consistently is we work to show what's in it for them. The acronym is WIFM. What's in it for me, actually? And so when I come to the table as a stakeholder, telling me this is what you must do because of an executive order and you're required, and giving them these sort of directives is not really the way that has worked for us. It's more of, you do security and you know a lot of stuff. You do HR, you know a lot of stuff, and you have authorities. I'm not here to do any of that. I'm here to give you information so that you can do that, but inform with the stuff that we get because we have UAM and no one else has it. That's what's in it for them. They get more, they become more. And oftentimes we do little gestures. It's not expensive. We will do things like, if we buy chairs, buy an extra chair. It's old school, help somebody out. We build personal relationships with folks. And it's not like a flip the switch. It's a process. And I watched us move from people with their arms crossed, not showing up for the meeting, to a place now where they come in, when they rotate out, they bring the new one, and left seat, right seat. Like, there's a whole lot of love happening, and it didn't cost a lot of money. And they're sharing and communicating, and I don't think they feel threatened. And also, they're talking in ways that they never did before. We've done what the order said, which was create synergies between these organizations in our shop, so that they're all doing the larger job of helping us stay left of loss. And those are two gems that I would say: food, and telling them or helping communicate to them what's in it for them, and pushing down the part about what you got to do and we're forcing you to do, because that never works, ever. Not even in our individual lives, much less in organizational practice.
That's perfect. All right. No better way to leave it than that. We appreciate you. And we look forward to having future discussions with you. Thank you again for joining us all. And on
Thank you
behalf of
all. Have a
ATARC,
really good afternoon.
you as well. Thank you so much.
Bye.